I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to the Insider Insight Show. I am honored to have back with me a fan favorite from our radio broadcast, Senator Eric Lucero from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was elected and his background is very unique. And again, is a testament to the fact that, Eric had a had a comfortable life in the IT world and decided that he was going to serve his state and our country by seeking elected office. And he has made an incredibly positive difference, not just for his initial House district and now the state of Minnesota through the Senate, but also for our country because he serves as a role model for every person in the political world in how to make a positive difference. Eric was elected to the Minnesota House of Representatives in 2014, 16, 18, and 20. He then was elected to the Minnesota Senate in 2022. His professional background includes over 20 years in the information technology and cybersecurity fields. And Eric's academic background includes an MBA from the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota, a Bachelor of Applied Science in Computer Forensics, and a Bachelor of Science in Law Enforcement with minors in Mathematics and Psychology, all from Metropolitan State University, as well as a Computer Networking Design and Development degree from NEI College of Technology. It's my privilege, pleasure, and honor to welcome back to our platform Senator Eric Lucero. Eric, welcome back.
Thank you, Dr. Janda. It's always an honor to join you.
So the first comment I always get, Eric, after you've been on our radio show from our listening audience is, he just tells it like it is. And Senator Lucero is so different from many of the folks that we encounter in the political world. So let's lay it on the line, Eric. Give us your assessment, the good, the bad, the ugly, if you will. We're about 150 days now into the new Trump 2.0 administration. Give us your take. Give us your assessment.
Well, I think President Trump is doing everything that he can as fast as he can. And I say that because one of the analogies that I've often used in comparing our republic to, I describe it to myself actually, one who's continuously battling with weight. And so if one wakes up and they look in the mirror one day and they say, "Man, I got to lose weight," they didn't get to that status overnight.
Mm-hmm.
That was one scoop of ice cream multiple times, spanning months and probably years. And after engaging in that for years, it accumulates to a recognition that, hey, I got to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
So much like our republic, our republic is conditioned on people being involved, being active, being aware, and holding public officials accountable for the actions. And decades have gone by, decades upon decades upon decades of elected officials making poor decisions, decisions that are short-term thinking that have accumulated upon themselves. And we get to the status now where we have budget deficits, we have bloated agencies that are run amok, we have people that are within agencies that are actively opposing the administration. And so when President Trump comes in Trump version 1 or Trump office 1, only so much can be done in 4 years. And there's also a learning curve to anything we do in life, anything. And then in Trump version 2, he took what he learned in the first 4 years with the recognition that he's got a 4-year window, and we didn't get here overnight. You don't just like waking up in the mirror. You can't say, I don't like what I've become, and I have an expectation that I'm going to lose weight overnight. It doesn't work that way. And so with President Trump 150 days into his second term, we have to level set our expectations. It took us decades to get here. He's doing the best he can in the time that he has, given that it's a massive endeavor to try to move the needle in these various areas. So I give him excellent score for what he's been able to accomplish in this time.
And it's interesting because right now, there's this situation in LA, and if certain powers that want to have it their way, it'll be in 1,500 cities around the United States. we have this illegal immigration issue and these protests. And the way President Trump in 2.0 is handling these protests, to me, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is very different the way Trump in Trump 1.0 handled, and in particular in the 1.0 administration in Minneapolis with the George Floyd event. Eric, give us the background because we're at ground zero with George Floyd, right? Uh, that entire situation seemed, I'm not going to say not contrived, but it seemed manipulated. Is that an overstatement? So give us your take on the George Floyd situation, how it was handled, first of all, not handled by your governor, and then how it took about a week before President Trump actually kind of started mobilizing efforts in the Minneapolis area, as opposed to what he's doing now and what he did in Los Angeles. Your take, Eric.
So the executive branch in each of the states and on the national level, the federal level, is to enforce the law. It
Mhm.
is to keep the peace. It's to protect the safety and security of the residents and the citizens. There is an assumption that the office holder, governor in this case,
Mhm.
there is an assumption that they are acting on the best will. They actually have an interest in protecting the safety and security of law-abiding citizens. And so Trump 1.0, I think, was acting upon that. He assumed that Governor Walz in this case had the best interest of Minnesotans in mind. And he deferred, President Trump deferring the decisions to the closest to the action there, the criminal law-breaking thugs, riotous persons, that he would defer the decision making to the boots on the ground. Trump 2.0 has learned from that first experience that assumption clearly isn't the case with Governor Walz, Tim Walz, and other Democrat governors across the country, such as Gavin Newsom in California. And so knowing now that they are not necessarily going to act in the best interest, and what I mean by that is on one side, you have the safety and security of law abiding citizens. On the other side, you have his base, Governor Walz's base, and the base of many Democrats across the country. And that is lawlessness, anarchists, those that are seeking to undermine the very civilization that has got us to this point. And so he made the decision, he being Governor Walz, made the decision to side with those that don't have our best interests, the anarchists, over the safety and security of law-abiding citizens. That's why he made the choice, the deliberate choice, not to act. And so that's why we're seeing now a difference in response with President Trump, because he does have the best interests of the safety and security of law-abiding citizens in mind. And that's why he's making the decision to do that. I just heard, I think it was earlier today, a quote to the effect of, if Gavin Newsom is not going to protect Californians, President Trump is going to protect Americans,
Mhm.
and that includes Californians. And if the governor in California isn't going to protect Californians, President Trump will. So
That,
actually another layer to expand on the answer to your question is, well, what happened
Mhm.
in Minnesota at that time? Well, there are those out there that are seeking to find events that they can
Yep.
harness
Mhm.
to exploit to further their own insidious agenda. And we've heard the cases of pallets of bricks being dropped off, of people distributing masks to cover their identity, their faces, and mobilize. We've heard of efforts of people being paid protesters. These forces that are operating behind the scenes, coordinating this, they bring these things to help foster and cultivate this lawlessness. And that's exactly what happened in Minneapolis. And I fear that's what's going to happen across the country here in the coming days. But we can have the confidence that President Trump is actually going to act.
At the time, I got a lot of heat back in 2020, Eric, when I was saying that the riots were not about George Floyd. they were about hijacking the situation that occurred with George Floyd to benefit the anarchists, if you will, in this country. And I got a lot of heat for that. Well, just as I'm getting some heat now, not quite as much interesting, but I'm getting some heat now by saying what's happening in LA is not about illegal immigration. This whole issue about, June 14th and the King's Parade, whatever it is, it's not about illegal immigration. They're hijacking illegal immigration as a means to advance their anarchist agenda and movement and operation. Now, am I off on that?
No, that is absolutely spot on. I think it was James Carville years ago said, "Never let a crisis go to waste." I think that was him. But regardless, that's the point here. So they have an agenda. Then they're constantly surveying the environment, looking for opportunities to advance their agenda. And their agenda is advanced through chaos and lawlessness. And they are manipulating the emotions. There might be people that show up to these protests and they have become useful idiots. They are being used. And so when people show up to these protests, many of them are being paid, but some of them, like it's a genuine organic thing, they show up. They are being manipulated to advance the cause of undermining the country, and they're using as a masquerade the illegal immigration topic, but their real agenda is to undermine the system, to attack the republic, to tear down this culture and replace it with something that's not, again, what our civilization is founded on, which is a constitution.
And a huge component of this unrest are these NGOs, non-government organizations that support, and many of which are, quote, charities that have tax exempt status, when in fact they're anything but charities. They should have anything but tax exempt status. They're in fact operations to sow not just ill will, but to sow a civil war or revolution. Is that an overstatement?
So in your intro, you reference my background. What I do for a living is cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm on the defensive side. I'm defending networks and infrastructure. And so what am I defending against? I'm defending against those that are surveying the environment, looking for vulnerabilities that they can exploit for their own malicious purposes. That's exactly what's happening here. These NGOs and others, whereas they may have been, decades ago, they might have been, there was a good intention behind many of these nonprofits or other organizations. But what happens is over time, the threat actors are surveying the environment and they're looking for institutions throughout society, whether they be nonprofits, whether they be NGOs, so they can cloak themselves, masquerading, again, using that term. They give an appearance on the outside of something that they are not really on the inside. So they're surveying the environment, these threat actors, looking for vulnerabilities such as NGOs or nonprofits, so that they can then use those to exploit the vulnerabilities within the system. And that comes through fraud. It comes through laundering dollars. It comes through organizing people. And again, you are spot on in terms of the threat and their cause.
And Eric, going back to 2020, the summer of love, 2020, Kamala Harris, who had not been installed yet as vice president, who was running for the office, she was in fact supporting a charitable organization, an NGO in Minnesota, that was actually leading to the release of people that were arrested for not protesting, for actual criminal acts.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Correct?
Yeah. So an organization was set up that would pay the bail to get people out of prison, or not prison, jail. So people are arrested, they're put into jail. Jail is the holding cell essentially before you go to court for your trial. And so to get out is obviously to pay the bail. Many of these people didn't have the funds to do so. So an organization gets set up. Dollars came in from Hollywood. Hollywood and other high-profile actors and actresses contributed dollars from out of state to this organization, who then in turn use those dollars to pay to get these people that are arrested out of jail back on the streets.
So
And
they,
it's so and Kamala Harris promoted that. That's exactly right.
to, which led to more crime,
Exactly.
more unrest,
Yes.
which was exactly the plan.
Exactly.
So, Eric, let's put Eric Lucero as the governor of California. Gavin Newsom is gone. Eric Lucero is the governor of California. And unrest breaks out in LA. How would Eric Lucero have handled that?
It'd be just like a wildfire. A wildfire is a threat. It damages people's lives and their property.
Mhm.
The first thing to do is to contain it. To contain a wildfire, you have to have personnel that are trained and equipped to do so. So just like a riot, you have to get personnel and equipment that are trained to respond to it, in position, mobilized as fast as possible, because urgency obviously matters. And then once that's in place, to try to contain the best as possible, contain and eventually put out the criminal rioters. And there's a huge distinction between what's happening now, this lawlessness, and peacefully assembling to
That's right.
protest government for redress of grievances. And that is not what's happening. Peaceful protest, peaceful is the key word.
That's right.
And peaceful is the antithesis of what they're doing. They're firebombing, they're destroying property, people's lives are at stake. And so that would be the response, is to act with urgency, to get properly trained personnel and equipment, to contain and eventually end.
So, how does someone, which is drastically different than what Gavin Newsom did and did not do, right? He fanned the flames. He allowed it to become a George Floyd-esque event by allowing it to not contain it. So, how does Gavin Newsom think that this is going to be a win for him politically and for the people of Los Angeles and California entirely, with the way he's handled this? I hate to get in a psychopath's mind, but how in the
Yeah.
world does he think this is going to benefit him and the people of LA and the people of California by what he's
I
doing?
don't,
Or
yeah, I do not know what his long-term plan is, or what is, he obviously has an objective,
right,
whatever the objective is. He's obviously laid it out, and he has one of the things you do is, when you're trying to achieve a goal, you first establish what that goal is, where you want to be, you establish your current position, and then you create this roadmap of the individual steps to get from where you are to where you want to be. I don't know what his goal is. I can tell you what his goal should be, and that is to protect innocent life and to protect property. That's what he should be doing. So if that was his goal, you can look at his present position and map out the steps between it. Uh, that's what anybody should be doing who holds the office of governor, for sure. And that is the long-term stability of our society. Again, it is assumed that people who volunteer to run for office and hold that office are going to act in the best interest of the citizens. But clearly, we are seeing over time here that immoral and unethical people, when they come into office, such as Governor Walz or Gavin Newsom, who have ulterior motives and clearly different agendas or goals than protecting our society, then that's when chaos ensues, and they fan the flames of the enemies of our state and our country.
and in this instance with LA, President Trump, of which he has gotten a lot of heat for, but it has led to significant disruption of the terrorism, if you will, in LA. He called in the National Guard, said, you're going to protect federal employees, you're going to protect federal buildings, and you're going to serve as a backup to the police if they get overrun. Then he said, we're going to bring the Marines in and do the same. Well, that put a pretty big lid on a lot of this acting out of these anarchists. Fair assessment?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because the anarchists and criminals in general, they as you mentioned in the open, I have a background in law enforcement.
Yeah.
And one of the things that is the objective of law enforcement is to deter criminals,
Hmm.
deter behavior.
Hmm.
And so the opposite of deterrence then is to feel emboldened. And so a criminal who's intent on committing malice is either going to be deterred from committing that malice with with law and order and the strength of the institution, such as the law enforcement and others, or they're going to feel emboldened. That is exactly what Governor Walz did because he lacked action back in George Floyd. He emboldened those criminals that have an intent to act with malice. And so when it comes now to California, those criminal actors with that mindset, they are being deterred from acting with malice because they know that they are going to be matched with force and be pushed back rather than being emboldened to further their malicious cause.
And in fact, and people say, well, that really hurt the people of Minneapolis. It hurt the people of Minnesota. Actually, it hurt every American because that spark there and that lack of action then was translated into let's do this in every large city. Let's do this in a
Exactly.
medium size. Let's do it everywhere. Well, now that agenda has been upended by the way in which President Trump in the 2.0 approach has implemented the use of the National Guard and Marines. We're going to do whatever it takes to restore law and order. We're going to put them in as a backup. And if the police get overrun, guess what? This is who you're facing.
Yep, exactly. And as I mentioned, just going back to the analogy I used before, when this is compounding on itself, when government doesn't respond with force to quash these criminal actors, they get emboldened, and emboldened criminals is contagious. And it happen, day after day, week after week of lack of response by government to protect the safety and security of law-abiding citizens. The criminals get emboldened, and weeks go by, months go by, and it grows. It grows like a cancer. And so, with President Trump responding, it's now going to demonstrate to these people, hey, you are going to be stopped. And it's going to stop them then from feeling emboldened, and it's going to continue, it's going to stop the continuation of this, again, emboldened feeling that they have. The concern is after Trump is gone 4 years from now, right, when his second term is over, depending on who replaces him, if they treat criminals with kid gloves,
Yep.
If his successor does that, then it'll bring back up these feelings of emboldened criminals, and then it might be a repeat of what we've had in the past.
Now, many people have gotten in touch with me and say, Dave, I'm not in LA, but I am in a fairly large city or a small city, whatever. I feel helpless. I feel as though there's nothing I can really do. Well, I absolutely, and when I respond to these people, Eric, and tell me if I'm offline, I said, no, there's plenty you can do. You can be proactive about this. There's nothing wrong, and I've done this before in 2020, went to our local police department in our city and said, look, this is going to be coming here, right? And peaceful protesting, as you outlined, is one thing. However, you also know the bad actors in the area. What are you doing about contacting them and say, you want to peacefully protest, you can peacefully protest, but if you're going to jump into criminal related activities, looting, arson, harming people, blocking cars, throwing, you know what? We're not going to put up with that. And I think if every person did this in their community, it would actually, ahead of time, it would actually insulate potentially that community from turning into an LA. We're all about peaceful protesting, fine, fine. But what are you doing with the known troublemakers in this area to let them know it's the bad stuff, the criminal stuff is not going to be tolerated? Is that a bridge too far?
Signaling or sending a message is something that I think is all of our responsibility.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, first and foremost, we recognize that each and every one of us, regardless of who we are, has influence. Some of us have a bigger sphere of influence, some of us have a smaller sphere of influence, but we all have influence. And so if you are a father, you have influence over your children, and perhaps if you live in a community, your neighbors. You have influence. So the way that you have conversations, you can have an influence over hearts and minds. Second, we need to make sure it's clear that we support law enforcement in our area.
Mm-hmm.
Law enforcement, the professional men and women who risk their lives each and every day to protect ours, are humans too. And they need to have encouragement. They need to know that the citizens of the area have their backs, that we support them. Because unlike the Minneapolis City Council, for example, in the days following George Floyd, or the weeks actually, there's 13 members on the council. 9 of them, a supermajority, got up on a stage with big letters that said "defund police." And so that sends a signal
It does.
to law enforcement, and it demoralizes them.
And it sends a
So
signal to the bad guys.
yeah, 100%. Exactly. Yep. So number one, recognize that we each have influence regardless of who we are or what we do, and to speak and influence hearts and minds of those around us within our sphere, a positive message. Number two, the law enforcement in our area, whether it be a police department, whether it be a sheriff's department, need to know that we have their back and we support those men and women. And then third is have I've organized peaceful rallies
Mm-hmm.
within my own community to send that signal as broadly as possible, to get several hundred people to come together. I did it in a local park in my community, and there was Black Lives Matter. This was a couple of years ago, came out to my community. We are roughly 30 or so miles outside of the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. They came to my community and they blocked the streets, walking down with their unpeaceful demonstration. So having a local organizing an event in your local community, a local park, 2-3 weeks out, advertising to come out, and in that rally, you're showing that you support law enforcement, that you support people, and that we are definitely going to not tolerate lawlessness and criminal behavior, and these criminals are not welcomed here because, again, in our community, we support law enforcement, and we will run you out of town.
And, Eric, Karen Bass, the mayor of LA, was in a split screen was telling people they're peaceful protests while people are throwing Molotov cocktails, cars are burning, looting's occurring. And it's almost a tale of two cities. And then about 48 hours later, she's imposing a curfew because things are problematic. Well, I've been told from some people on the ground in LA, I said, so that's rather, Karen Bass, that's kind of like acting like a chameleon. I mean, before everything is great. I mean, these people are wonderful, and it's just, rainbows and lollipops, and these people are just protest peaceful, and as opposed to, we got a problem, folks, and we're imposing a strict curfew. I was told the reason why she flipped is because people in the LA community were jamming up her phone lines, coming into her office, complaining about what was occurring, and that she and Newsom and all of them were responsible. And what was she going to do about this? And if she didn't, she would be recalled. They would push for her to, whatever. But that, and you'll never hear this in the bought off lamestream fake media. That is what led to the huge change in Karen Bass, the mayor of LA.
That's an exact demonstration of what you've asked me several times in the past, which is, well, Eric, what can citizens do? They might feel helpless. What can they do? And my answer has always been, contact your representative, whoever your elected official is. Let them know your voice. And you can see the power of that when you organize within the community and help to deliver a message to your elected official. the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Those who show up are those who have influence.
Hmm.
And it appears that people in that community showed up
Yeah.
and they influenced the mayor because she thought X and communicated X, that these people are nice, they're coddly. If we can coddle the criminals, and if you just give them a big enough hug, they'll go away. When the reality is Y was the position, and the people showed up, they influenced, and she changed her mind. It's exactly how the system is supposed to work, and that's why being active, being involved, showing up, and making your voice known does make a difference.
And Eric, the huge misconception about people is, oh, my voice doesn't matter. There's no sense me contacting my representative in the state or state senator or senator in DC or my congressman or my governor or the White House. Eric, obviously I completely disagree with that, but what do you say to those people that say they're not going to listen to me. They're not going to. And so what do you say to those people, and what is the most effective means of contacting an elected representative?
The most effective, if you think of it as a continuum, what are the methods to contact?
Uh-huh.
You can meet in person, you can have a phone call, you can send an email, you can send a snail mail, traditional letter through the mail. You could maybe send a text message if you have, their phone number. You could send a direct message through social media. What is that continuum? Well, the more impersonal you get, a text message, a direct message through social media, the less effective it is. The most effective on this continuum is to be in person. So the most in person you can get would be obviously a face-to-face conversation, a meeting. The next would be a voice conversation over the telephone or a Zoom call. I do those all the time with people. And so if anybody has that opinion that their voice doesn't matter, they are wrong. They are wrong. You need now, while they may be correct if they think firing off some email one and done and that's going to be it. That's not how it works. Look at what the other side does.
Yeah.
They are persistent
Yep.
and they organize to grow their numbers. Then they show up at town halls in their larger numbers trying to demagogue or influence the elected representative. We need to do the same thing, but with respect. I don't mean to show up in,
Oh,
in
no.
numbers to attack,
Right.
but I mean show up in numbers, meaning you actually have to put effort into organizing.
Mhm.
Our republic requires people to organize, grow numbers, to have people agree with the cause, and then those larger numbers obviously help to influence. So if you don't think your voice as an individual matters, then get 10 people to agree with you, then go and have a meeting with your elected representative.
Well, it's interesting. Of those people that come back at me and say, it doesn't matter, Dave, it's a waste of my time. I ask them the following question. I said, how many times have you actually tried to contact your elected representative? I mean, not put something on social media I mean, actually called their office or tried to meet with them or tried to meet with their chief of staff or their legislative director or their community relations. How many times? And Eric, it's not 100%, but it's close. The answer is, well, I really haven't because it's just a waste of my time. I go, how do you know if you've never tried?
Exactly. And what they're doing is they're trying to convince themselves
Yeah.
they really don't want to, at the risk of being a little bit offensive, some people that have that opinion, I would suggest they're just lazy.
Yeah.
They don't really they have a complaint.
Well,
They're an
that's
armchair quarterback. They have this opinion,
yeah.
but then they're too lazy to take the steps necessary to take action. And then so because they are lazy and they don't want to take action, they then come up with excuses. Another phrase that I've heard years ago, never underestimate one's ability to rationalize. So if they already believe, they don't want to take the necessary action, and so they will do what they can in their head to convince themselves that it's not worth it, and therefore it justifies they're not taking action. That's many of those people, unfortunately, in a nutshell.
Well, and the other side of that I get is, well, I don't want to do it because I'm afraid I'll get targeted then for speaking out. Well, don't the odds of you getting targeted somewhere, I mean, it's you're going to get if you let these people get away with what they get away with at times, you're going to get targeted whether you seek it you seek to speak to these people or not, right? Because as they gain more power, you get less freedoms and liberties, and they're going to come after you if you just
Exactly. Yep, exactly. All that is required for evil to prevail, as we know, is for good people to do nothing. And so we have multiple levels of people that are involved. As an office holder myself, yep. Is there a risk? There certainly is. Is that risk worth the republic? I believe it is.
Mhm.
But there is certainly much less risk for somebody simply contacting their representative or organizing a rally. We're all it's an arena, and is there a risk in the battle of ideas? There certainly is. I won't say that, but the risk of somebody just simply getting involved by making their voice known or organizing a rally in their community is significantly less, and the benefit far outweighs the risk. And like you suggested, the decision to do nothing, then evil advances and prevails, and eventually they are taking our liberties away a little bit at a time through higher taxes, through higher regulation, and punitive weaponization of government.
uh, Tim Walz, your governor, on the same level as our governor here in the People's Republic of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. What are their futures?
Well, I hope that people's hearts and minds continue to be opened and that their futures are to be not reelected, because people wake up and they recognize that Kim Walz, your governors in other these blue states, they are a detriment to obtaining high qualities of life. They are an impediment to that. And if people wake up and have that, are empowered with that information, that these people, Governor Walz and others, would lose reelection. That's what I hope. But aside from that, if the legacy media continues to run defense for them,
Yeah.
continues to be the mouthpiece of the Democrat National Committee,
Mhm.
then people, the general population, it's more challenging to get information and be empowered with knowledge to make proper decisions. And then such people like Governor Walz might continue to advance or be in the public sphere. But if we simply hold them accountable, we being those that are empowered with knowledge, and we continue to put efforts into empowering our friends and neighbors with knowledge, people want a high quality life. People don't want to live in fear
No.
that their streets are going to be have fires and damage and rioters running down them. People want to be able to go out in their yard. They want their kids to be able to ride their bike down the street. They don't want this kind of lifestyle. And if people don't want that, then they need to vote accordingly. That's really what it comes down to. And so the future of your governor, my governor, governor of California, I'm hoping that they have to be sent back to the private sector and do whatever they're going to do, but not be in a position of influence over the safety or running each of our states.
If Donald Trump called you today, Eric, and said, "Come over to the Oval Office, Eric, and I want your input over some of the steps you think I should be taking to empower every American and to move our country down the road," what were the couple of things you tell him?
I would say persevere in what you're doing
Yeah.
and just be persistent. Be persistent, push through, be an overcomer. And some of the policies that I would say is what he's already put forward are government takes our liberty away with regulation. So rolling back the continued regulation and taxes, right? Our labor, each of us only has a finite number of years to live in this life. I don't know what the average is now, but let's just say 75 years. We have a finite number of years to live. And in those finite years, we are working to translate our labor during these years, our labor into money, into wealth. And when the government taxes that at 25%, 35%, whatever, they are quite literally taking our labor because we have a finite amount of time to translate our labor into uh, uh, money. And then when the government takes more of that money, they are taking our labor and they're taking our opportunity to make decisions with what we want to do with our money. And those are the two things that I would say roll back, continue rolling back the regulation, continue to lower the taxes, and allow people to keep their own money, which is just a translation of their labor.
Well, and it's interesting, and to protect, if you will, the populace a bit from these boom bust cycles, right? So we just saw this with the state legislature in Florida. They actually passed, and DeSantis signed it recently, about utilizing what the Constitution says is money, physical gold and physical silver, to be used in transactions and not to be taxed. This is a very big step for empowering people. And the question I have, Eric, is, well, I think there may be 7 states that are on a similar path. Why aren't there 50?
That's an entirely that's another conversation. But yeah, we have our system right now
Yeah.
of a Federal Reserve note, fiat currency, having taken us off of the gold standard back, I think it was the Nixon era.
Yeah,
Uh,
71. August.
and we have a fiat currency, which means nothing. And inflation is not things becoming more expensive. It is the value of each individual dollar becoming devalued. So it takes more of a devalued dollar, more of them to purchase the same item. It gives the appearance that the item is more expensive, knowing your dollar is just becoming weakened. And yeah, states being empowered to get out of this fiat system with whatever
Mhm.
mechanism is available,
Mhm.
100% agree with. Unfortunately, again, it's more of a complex topic, as you know, and people need to understand the system. The system, those that have their assets in cash, it is absolutely immoral what's happening.
Yeah.
Our seniors, those that again have a liquid assets, what the federal government is doing with this spending and deliberate inflation
Mhm.
by devaluing the dollars is taking money away from those that have worked so hard, and it's very immoral and insidious.
And in fact, Eric, if you decided tomorrow to institute some legislation in the state of Minnesota, who would be the big bad wolves that show up at your door saying, Eric, you're not going to do this?
Well, it's happened to me a couple times on several different topics. Just
No.
one of them was I had introduced, so with my technology background,
Mhm.
years ago, I had introduced legislation that would, so when it comes to digital data, I'm a strong privacy advocate. I strongly believe that each individual owns their own data and affirmative consent is needed for the data harvesting, the data mining, and then the sharing with third parties of said data. And so I introduced bills that would have put controls in place and required affirmative consent by an opt-in rather than an assumed sharing is permissible, and then the effort is to opt out. The next day after I introduced that, the next day
Yeah.
I had Google,
Mhm.
Apple,
Yeah.
and I think there was one or two other technology lobbyists in my office. So yes, the big bad wolves, when they will show up
Yeah.
if you introduce legislation that's going to interfere with their business model. But you know what? I believe in protecting individuals
Yeah.
well, way more than I do about using government to protect these large institutes. Government does not exist to erect barriers to protect business. It exists to protect individuals, and that's what I will continue to believe.
Final question to all those folks in our listening audience that say, look, I just want to do what's right for my family's future, for my kids and my grandkids to not just keep the freedoms and liberties they currently have, but to actually expand them to what they were when I was a kid, right? Or when my parents were alive, or when my grandparents were alive. Final question. What are the steps each and every one of our listeners can do to not just preserve what they got, but to enhance their freedoms and liberties to what prior generations had?
People need, as I've said before, the answer to this question is the same answer. Those who show up are those who have influence.
Okay.
I just this week, so in Minnesota, we ended the legislative session. There was a special session, so it's over. What I do at the end of each special, or not special, end of each legislative session, I will then go around to the 8 communities that I have in my Senate district, I'll visit the city councils and the school boards.
Mhm.
And when I'm there, it's always frustrating because there's 3 people in the audience. And those who show up are those who have influence. So my answer to your question, what do people need to do to get back to having more liberty, more freedom, preserving liberty and freedom to the next generation? The first step would be to show up to if you can't show up at these larger events, go to your city council,
Yeah.
go to your school board, know what they're talking about.
Right.
And you might, if you go there for 4 meetings, that's my challenge. Go there for 4 meetings. You might become so frustrated with what's being discussed or what they're pushing, you might get involved.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to get involved yourself, find one of the people that is speaking that you support and agree with and ask them, how can you help them?
Mhm.
That's how we advance liberty and freedom, is we either support somebody that's doing it for us or we do it ourselves. And it starts at the local level.
And a good example of that, Eric, is when we look back in 2019 and the years that followed with the whole COVID goat rodeo, it was actually people stepping up that stopped it.
Exactly.
And a lot of folks, I think it was their first time out because they saw the devastation that was occurring and how many of the things being recommended made no sense. And I truly believe the 20% of people, and it was about 20% that stood up, they made a big dent in saving our constitutional republic. And the key is we can't let another event happen and wait for another event to happen before we all do the right thing and step up.
Exactly.
And that's
Be
why
proactive, not reactive.
I thank you, Eric. You have stepped up beyond the vast majority of what who folks stand up. You've stood up for freedom and liberty of every person, not just in your district, in your state, but in our country, and frankly, around the world. You are a proponent of freedom and liberty, and I thank you, Eric. You're a very brave man, and we need more Eric Luceros in government. We need more Eric Luceros in every community, and each and every one of us can become an Eric Lucero as an advocate for the future of our constitutional republic and the kids of the world that don't have the.
I'm super humbled by those words. I've always said though, there's nothing special about me. I'm just some guy. And my goal is just to stand for the truth and say the truth. Truth in love,
Yeah.
being gentle and loving with the truth, but the truth nonetheless.
And
And
Eric,
so I appreciate those words. And yeah, we're all in this together. We just have to stand and continue to fight for the truth.
and how can folks follow you on a daily basis? Because you're always doing something. You are always pushing the envelope on the freedom liberty front.
Well, I do have a weekly email update. People can go to my webpage. If you just Google Eric Lucero, Senator, Minnesota, you'll come up to my member page and you can sign up for my email distribution. Or on social media then, which is non-government. It's my social media, non-government paid for or mechanism,
Mhm.
but social media it's Eric Lucero MN, both on X and on Facebook.
I thank you, Eric. For every,
Thank you so much. And I always appreciate the conversation.
well, I always do too. You are always enlightening and inspiring. And I thank you folks for joining us. Until next time, Dave Jandis signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. Thanks for your time today.